Tonight we celebrate the tales of our feline friends and how they became idolised in Egyptian mythology. These aren't just stories of cats being cats. They're legends of divine intervention, cosmic negotiations, and how a beer-fueled mishap turned humanity's fiercest predators into some of our most beloved, if slightly chaotic, companions. Before we begin, please comment where you are and what time it is so we can see who's joining us from around the world. It's fascinating to discover where you are tuning in from. Now close your eyes, sink into the covers, take a deep breath and release it, relaxing your face, shoulders, and the rest of your body. Let your thoughts slow, and let this very old tale carry you gently into slumber. Ra was having a terrible day, the kind of day that makes even a sun god consider early retirement. Humanity, his beloved creation, had developed an unfortunate habit of mocking his advancing age and plotting against his rule. Now, most gods would simply send a strongly worded warning, perhaps a minor plague or an annoying infestation. But Ra, feeling particularly petty, several thousand years of service will do that to a deity, decided on a more dramatic approach. He plucked his own eye, which admittedly sounds extreme even for divine retribution. This eye transformed into Sekhmet, a lioness goddess so fierce that her breath could create deserts, which explains quite a lot about Egypt's geography. Sekhmet took to her task with rather too much enthusiasm. Like a cat with infinite lives, she rampaged across the land, turning the Nile red with blood, adding mass destruction to her divine resume with remarkable efficiency. Ra, watching from above, had what gods rarely have, a change of heart. Perhaps, he thought, complete annihilation was a slight overreaction to some disrespectful graffiti and unauthorised worship parties. But here's the problem. Once you create a bloodthirsty lion goddess of destruction, you can't just say, "Sorry, change my mind." Sekhmet had developed quite the taste for humanity, like a cat with a new favourite treat. The other gods gathered for an emergency meeting, though several suggested just moving to different realms. Thoth, ever practical, proposed a solution so clever it could only work in a world where gods made the rules. They took several thousand jugs of the finest Egyptian beer, added pomegranate juice for that special blood-red colour, and flooded the fields where Sekhmet was hunting, the ancient equivalent of a divine intervention. Sekhmet, not known for cautious consumption, lapped up the crimson liquid, thinking she'd found the largest blood puddle in recorded history. The other gods watched nervously, taking bets on the outcome. Several thousand jugs later, the fierce lioness goddess transformed into something far less threatening. Hathor, goddess of love and joy, who had much better hobbies than rampant destruction, like dancing and music. The next morning dawned with unusual quietness, as Hathor, who was Sekhmet, discovered what happens when one drinks enough beer to flood the two lands. Her mighty lion's roar had become more of a whimper. The other gods tiptoed around the palace carefully, speaking in whispers, though Thoth couldn't resist making detailed notes about divine transformation and the effects of alcohol on celestial beings. Ra, feeling somewhat guilty about the whole situation, commissioned Isis herself to create a remedy. She mixed lotus flowers, morning dew, and starlight, with just a touch of hair of the celestial dog. But the cats of Egypt, who had watched it all unfold, maintained their knowing smiles. They alone remembered how their fierce lion goddess had chased her own tail, tried to befriend a palm tree, and purred herself to sleep. From that day forward, beer was offered daily in Sekhmet's temples, a diplomatic bribe disguised as worship. To keep the peace, the priest would say, while sampling the offerings. And every year, during the Festival of Drunkenness, Egyptians would gather to commemorate the day when beer saved the world. They'd drink red-tinted brew, dancing until dawn, just like their goddess. Egypt's cats, meanwhile, gained quite a reputation for their divine connection. After all, they reasoned, if their mighty lioness queen could be soothed by drink, then they deserved nothing less than complete adoration. In the days when gods walked more freely among mortals, and the commute between Earth and the divine realm didn't require so much paperwork, Bastet faced an interesting management challenge. As a goddess responsible for protection, pleasure, and keeping an eye on humanity, she found herself increasingly overwhelmed by the reporting requirements of her position. "There's simply too much to monitor," she complained to Rhea during one of their celestial staff meetings. "Humans are getting creative with their mischief, and I can't be everywhere at once." She paused, watching a group of humans below attempting to domesticate geese, which was going about as well as one might expect. "Though that," she added, "is rather entertaining." Ra, who had learned his lesson about rash solutions involving fierce goddesses and mass destruction, suggested she might consider a more subtle approach to surveillance. "What you need," he said, warming to his subject, "is a network of agents, something inconspicuous, yet commanding enough to gain access to every household." Bastet considered this while grooming her whiskers, a habit she'd never quite shaken from her lioness days. The solution, when it came to her, was brilliant in its simplicity. She would create children in her own image, smaller perhaps, and slightly less prone to destroying cities, but retaining all her essential qualities: grace, strength, hunting prowess, and an unshakable conviction that they were divine beings worthy of worship. And so, cats were born into the mortal world. But these weren't ordinary animals. Each carried a spark of divine essence, a direct line to their mother goddess. Bastet gave them gifts carefully chosen for their mission. The gift of observation, eyes that could see both the physical and spiritual realms, which is why cats often track invisible movements across rooms. Though sometimes, Bastet had to admit, they were just watching dust motes because they found them fascinating. The gift of judgment, the ability to assess human character with a single glance. This is why cats seem to instantly like some people, while treating others with unveiled contempt. Their reports to Bastet were surprisingly detailed. "Human female in the house by the river, feeds us well but has questionable taste in sandals." The gift of infiltration, the power to make themselves at home anywhere, regardless of whether they were invited. No palace was too grand, no humble dwelling too modest for Bastet's children to establish themselves as resident divines. The gift of communication, a direct telepathic link to Bastet herself, though the cats quickly discovered they could convince humans they were starving, even when they'd just been fed. This wasn't part of their official duties, but Bastet allowed it because, well, they were cats. Each evening as humans settled into sleep, cats would begin their real work. Those seemingly random midnight sprints across the house, actually urgent deliveries of intelligence to their divine mother. The mysterious gatherings on garden walls, departmental meetings to discuss their findings, the intense staring sessions, direct reports to Bastet herself, though sometimes they admittedly just zoned out and forgot what they were supposed to be reporting. Their reports were interesting. Some cats took their duties very seriously, providing detailed accounts of human activities. Others submitted reports that consisted mainly of complaints about the quality of their accommodations or requests for divine intervention in obtaining more comfortable sleeping spots. One particularly dedicated agent spent 3 months documenting the suspicious behaviour of a shadow on the wall, only to discover it was caused by a wobbly candlestick. Bastet received these reports with varying degrees of amusement and exasperation. "Yes, dear one," she would often respond, "but perhaps instead of detailing the exact number of times your human tried to work out where you wanted to go when they opened the door, you could tell me about the temple offerings they're skimming." The system worked remarkably well, despite some operational quirks. Cats proved excellent at infiltrating every level of society, from royal palaces to granaries. They were particularly good at detecting deception, though they sometimes used this skill primarily to determine who was lying about having already fed them. Humans, gradually realising they were under divine surveillance, began treating their feline housemates with increasing reverence. Temples started keeping cats as official observers of religious ceremonies, though some priests suspected the cats were mainly there for the comfortable sleeping spots and free incense. The practice of cats staring into space became well known throughout Egypt as a sign of divine communication, though As one ancient scribe noted in a moment of candour, sometimes they're reporting to Bastet, and sometimes they're just contemplating the existential nature of that red dot on the wall. In the early days of Egypt, when the gods were still sorting out who was in charge of what, a divine bureaucratic nightmare, Bastet noticed a peculiar problem. Her feline children, while excellent at looking regal and judging humans, had an unfortunate tendency to get themselves into life-ending situations. Their curiosity, it seemed, was writing checks their single life couldn't cash. Concerned about this design flaw, Bastet approached the divine council with a proposal. "My children," she declared, "need a few backup plans." The other gods, who had witnessed cats attempting to catch sacred ibises and falling off temple roofs, had to agree. Ra, still feeling guilty about the whole Sekhmet incident, was the first to offer a divine blessing. "Let them always land on their feet," he declared, "though perhaps we should also give them the wisdom to not jump from such high places to begin with." The latter part of the blessing, unfortunately, didn't quite take. Thoth contributed the gift of night vision, noting that most catastrophes happened because they couldn't properly see what they were charging toward. "Though," he added dryly, "perhaps we should also include the good sense to not charge toward everything they can see." This suggestion was also largely ignored by the cats themselves. Isis, ever practical, granted them the blessing of stealth and quick reflexes. "For all the good it will do," she muttered, watching a cat stalk a reflection on the wall. But it was Bastet who gave the most significant gift, 7 distinct lives, each blessed with one of her divine aspects. The first life was blessed with curiosity, which explains why young cats believe they're invincible. The second carried grace, though this often took a while to kick in. The third bore wisdom, which most cats conveniently forgot when birds were nearby. The fourth life held independence, leading to the famous feline attitude that humans were merely staff. The fifth contained mystery, explaining why cats stare intently at empty corners. The sixth bestowed healing, both for themselves and their chosen humans. And the seventh, most precious of all, carried love, though cats preferred to dispense this blessing on their own inscrutable schedule. Each transition between lives was said to be overseen by Bastet herself, who would often sigh and ask, "Really? That's how you use that life? Chasing a cucumber?" But like any mother, she continued to give her children second chances, and third chances, and fourth chances. The Egyptians, witnessing these multiple brushes with death followed by miraculous recoveries, began keeping careful count. Priests maintained extensive records of local cats' remaining lives, though the cats themselves refused to confirm or deny any official tally. This led to some rather amusing temple records, with entries like "Midnight Temple Cat, approximately 3 lives remaining," unless that incident with the sacred crocodile counted. The gravest crime in Egypt became the intentional killing of a cat, not just because they were sacred, but because no one wanted to be the person who had to explain to Bastet why one of her children had used up all their lives prematurely. The punishment was severe, though some historians argue that facing an angry cat goddess was probably worse than any earthly justice. Modern cats, of course, have negotiated an upgrade to 9 lives. Their union representatives were very persuasive, but they still carry the 7 original blessings of Bastet. This explains why they continue to test physical laws with alarming regularity, secure in the knowledge that they have a few extra chances to get it right. And somewhere, Bastet still watches, alternating between pride and exasperation as her children continue to treat their multiple lives like a cosmic warranty policy. At least, she consoles herself, they're not as bad as the time Sekhmet drank all that beer. Long before electric lights ruined humanity's appreciation of true darkness, the night posed quite a problem for the guardians of Egypt's sacred spaces. The priests did their best with torches and oil lamps, but evil spirits, being notably inconsiderate, tended to do their sneaking about during the darkest hours, when even the moon hid her face. This was particularly troublesome at the gates to the underworld. Anubis, responsible for guiding souls to their final judgment, found himself increasingly frustrated. They keep slipping past during the new moon, he complained to Bastet during one of their divine coffee breaks. The beverage hadn't been invented yet, but gods were always ahead of the trends. Just yesterday, 3 unauthorized souls tried to escape judgment by hiding in a shadow. A shadow? In the underworld? The audacity! Bastet, who had recently appointed her feline children as Earth surveillance experts, saw an opportunity for a franchise expansion. But there was a slight technical difficulty. Cats, despite their many talents, were as blind in the dark as any other creature. She took the problem to Thoth, who suggested installing magical torches. Isis recommended glowing hieroglyphs. Set, being Set, proposed just setting everything on fire permanently. None of these solutions seemed quite right. It was during a late-night stroll through the celestial realm that Bastet found her answer. She noticed how Khonsu, the moon god, was idly playing with some spare moonlight, rolling it between his fingers like silver thread. "Say," she said, trying to sound casual, "don't suppose you have any of that to spare?" Khonsu, who had always had a soft spot for cats, they were the only ones who appreciated his nighttime poetry recitals, was intrigued. After some negotiation and a promise that cats would occasionally listen to his new verses, he agreed to share a small portion of moonlight. Bastet gathered her children for the upgrade. Now, this might feel a bit strange, she warned, as she prepared to install the divine night vision equipment. The cats, being cats, pretended not to be interested while secretly being extremely curious. The procedure was delicate. Bastet took the essence of moonlight and carefully wove it into the back of each cat's eyes, creating what she called a tapetum lucidum, though most cats just called it their shine. The first cat to receive the gift immediately began testing it by knocking objects off tables in complete darkness, just to prove it could. The results were spectacular. Cats could now see in all but the deepest darkness, their eyes glowing with reflected moonlight whenever they caught even the faintest gleam. This had the added benefit of making them look particularly mysterious and divine, which they felt was only appropriate. Anubis was delighted with his new security force. Cats took up positions at every entrance to the underworld, their glowing eyes serving both as deterrent and detection system. Evil spirits, who had previously considered themselves quite sneaky, found themselves being caught by what appeared to be floating pairs of luminous orbs, accompanied by judgmental meows. The cats took to their new duties with typical feline enthusiasm, which is to say they performed them perfectly whenever they felt like it, and napped the rest of the time. But even their napping served a purpose. Spirits trying to sneak past a sleeping cat would inevitably make the mistake of thinking they were safe, only to discover that cats can go from deeply asleep to fully alert faster than a desert wind. They developed a complex shift system, though humans often misinterpreted their carefully planned guard rotations as random midnight zoomies. Some cats specialised in particular types of spirits. One famous temple cat became known as an expert in detecting spirits trying to disguise themselves as furniture, largely because she knocked over everything suspicious just to be sure. The job came with excellent benefits: premium sleeping spots in temples, regular offerings, and the right to swat at anything that moved suspiciously, including priests who stayed up too late. Some cats even developed side gigs using their night vision to help lost souls find their way to proper judgment. Though they charged extra for this service, usually payable in fish. Modern cats maintain their ancient duties, which explains why they still patrol houses at night, checking dark corners and staring intently at apparently empty spaces. If your cat suddenly starts watching something you can't see, they're probably just keeping you safe from unauthorized spirit activity. Or they're watching dust motes again. It's usually about 50-50. Their glowing eyes remain their most distinctive feature, a reminder of their sacred duty and divine heritage, though as one ancient text notes, the cats wish it known that while they can see in the dark, they still expect humans to feed them on time, regardless of visibility conditions. And somewhere in the world beyond, Khonsu still recites his moon poems to an appreciative audience of cats who listen with varying degrees of attention, but always with perfectly glowing eyes. Well, before modern medicine discovered the therapeutic benefits of specific sound frequencies, the ancient Egyptians had already unlocked one of the universe's most soothing secrets, though getting it to stay in one place and purr on command was another matter entirely. The origin of the purring cure dates back to when Bastet, ever the doting mother, was finalising the design specifications for her feline children. She had already given them night vision, courtesy of some borrowed moonlight, superior judgment capabilities, perhaps a bit too superior as it turned out, and enough attitude to fill the Nile Valley twice over. But something was missing. They need a healing ability, she mused to Sekhmet one afternoon, watching her prototype cats knocking test objects off various surfaces. Something subtle, yet powerful. Sekhmet, who was still slightly embarrassed about that whole blood and beer incident, suggested giving them the ability to breathe fire. Bastet, wisely, decided to workshop that idea a bit further. The inspiration came during a particularly relaxing evening, when Bastet was listening to the harmony of the spheres, the cosmic vibration that keeps the universe humming along. "That's it," she exclaimed, startling several nearby deities and causing a minor astronomical disruption that astronomers still can't quite explain. She captured a small portion of this universal resonance and modified it to a frequency that would work on the earthly plane without accidentally rearranging reality. This divine sound engineering resulted in the purr, a sophisticated healing mechanism cleverly disguised as an adorable noise. The first cat to receive this gift immediately began testing it by purring at various volumes and frequencies, much to everyone's delight. Well, almost everyone's. Thoth complained it was disrupting his concentration while writing important spells, but he was generally grumpy about new innovations anyway. Egyptian physicians, always keen observers, began noticing something peculiar. People who kept cats seemed to recover from injuries more quickly, experienced less pain, and generally maintained better health. After extensive research, which mostly involved convincing cats to purr on command, a challenge that led to the creation of the world's first treaty on diplomatic relations with felines, they began documenting the healing properties of the purr. Ancient medical papyri included fascinating prescriptions. For a broken bone, apply one purring cat to the affected area. Duration, until cat decides to leave. For headaches, place cat on pillow near head. Note, patient must accept that cat will probably sit on face instead. For general malaise, surround patient with purring cats. Warning, patient may never want to leave bed again. The cats naturally took their healing duties very seriously, which meant they performed them entirely on their own schedule. They developed a complex system of determining who needed healing the most, though historians suspect this system was heavily influenced by who had the most comfortable lap and the best offering of treats. Temple cats became particularly renowned for their healing abilities. These sacred practitioners would make their rounds through the temple sanatoriums, dispensing purrs with aristocratic grace. Some became specialists. One famous temple cat was known for being particularly effective with fevers, though she refused to work on Tuesdays for reasons she never explained. The healing purr proved especially effective for bone and muscle injuries. The frequency actually promotes tissue regeneration. Stress reduction, assuming the cat purrs where you want it to, not at 3 a.m. on your face. Pain relief, though some argue that cats just distract you from pain by sitting on other, previously unpained parts of your body. General wellness. It's hard to maintain negative energy when there's a purring cat nearby. Modern science has finally caught up with what Egyptian physicians knew thousands of years ago. Cat purrs operate at frequencies between 25 and 150 Hz. Precisely the range shown to promote healing in various tissues. The Egyptians would probably just nod wisely at this discovery, while pointing to medical texts thousands of years old that say basically the same thing, just with more hieroglyphs and cat doodles in the margins. cats continue to dispense this ancient therapy, though they maintain strict control over when and where they choose to activate their healing powers. As one frustrated physician noted in an ancient text, the treatment would be more effective if we could convince the cats to purr on the actual injury, rather than on the patient's head, but one does not simply tell a cat what to do. And somewhere, Bastet still smiles at her clever invention, a piece of universal harmony wrapped in fur and whiskers, dispensing healing through what appears to be aggressive relaxation. This final Egyptian cat tale can be found in the Book of the Dead. Every night as Ra's solar boat travelled through the dangerous waters of the underworld, the serpent of chaos, Apophis, waited in ambush. Now, most myths focus on Ra's daily victories, but they often skip over what historians call the night of the really big snake problem. When Ra decided that perhaps a different approach was needed, it happened during a particularly trying period when Apophis had been getting, as one ancient text delicately puts it, rather too full of himself. The Chaos Serpent had been working out, apparently, and had grown to such enormous size that even the other Chaos demons were starting to file complaints about personal space violations in the underworld break room. Ra, tired of dealing with the same snake every night, and perhaps a bit cranky from lack of sleep, called an emergency meeting of the Divine Council. "We need a new strategy," he announced, watching as Thoth prepared to take notes with his typical bureaucratic enthusiasm. Various gods offered suggestions. Set proposed hitting Apophis with a bigger boat. Sekhmet volunteered to drink the entire underworld river, though given her history with beverages, this idea was quickly tabled. Even Thoth's typically reliable suggestion of boring Apophis to death with administrative procedures seemed inadequate. It was while watching Bastet's cats patrolling the temple grounds that Ra had his epiphany. Cats, with their hunting prowess, natural grace, and complete conviction in their own superiority, were essentially tiny gods already. What if? And so was born what divine historians call Operation Feline Finale, though Thoth insisted on cataloguing it under strategic feliform, implementation of chaos reduction protocols. Ra chose the sacred Persea tree of Heliopolis as his battleground, a massive tree whose branches were said to hold up the sky itself. This was partly for symbolic reasons, but mostly because it provided excellent high ground for pouncing. On the fateful night, as Apophis approached his usual ambush point, he found something different. Instead of Ra's usual impressive but frankly predictable solar bark, there sat an enormous golden cat, calmly grooming its paws. The cat was the size of a temple, with eyes that shone like twin suns and claws that gleamed like crescent moons. Apophis, being a chaos serpent and therefore not the brightest demon in the underworld, failed to make the connection between missing sun god and giant mysterious cat. He proceeded with his usual routine of trying to swallow the world, only to discover that while swallowing a boat is one thing, swallowing a cat, particularly a divine cat with Ra's power, is quite another. What followed was less an epic battle and more what happens when a cat discovers a particularly ambitious piece of string. Ra's cat played with Apophis in classic feline style, batting the chaos serpent around the underworld with divine precision. The other gods watched in amazement as the fearsome Apophis was reduced to a confused tangle of scales and regret. The final pounce delivered from the highest branch of the Persea tree became legendary. Ra's cat form, backlit by his own divine radiance, descended upon Apophis with all the gravity of divine judgment and all the joy of a cat who has finally caught that red dot on the wall. The victory established several important precedents. Cats became officially recognised as chaos suppressors and evil repellers. The Persea tree gained status as the ultimate cosmic scratching post. Ra earned the respect of every cat in Egypt, though they tried not to show it too obviously. Following this triumph, Egyptians began placing cat statues at their doors and windows, not just as decoration, but as a warning to any chaos entities thinking of causing trouble. The message was clear: mess with this household, and you'll have to deal with the species that even Ra himself chose as his warrior form. Real cats took their new protective duties seriously, establishing an elaborate system of household patrol routes that humans often mistook for random running around at 3 a.m. They developed specialised techniques, the preventative knock, testing objects to ensure they wouldn't fall on their humans. The warning yowl, alerting the household to dangerous spirits or empty food bowls. The strategic nap, positioning themselves in doorways to trip any incoming evil entities. Modern cats maintain these ancient responsibilities, though they've updated their techniques for contemporary threats. That random sprint across your house at midnight, probably chasing an evil spirit. That strange meowing at an empty corner, obviously addressing an invisible demon. That dead mouse on your doorstep, a warning to other chaos entities. This house is protected. And somewhere, in the celestial realms, Ra keeps a special golden cat form ready, just in case chaos needs another reminder of why cats are the universe's perfect little warriors.